My billionaire husband handed me a photo of his blonde ex-girlfriend and said, "Dress like her for tonight's gala." I looked at that picture, then at my beautiful dark skin in the mirror and made a decision that would change everything. What happened next shocked everyone, including him. If you've ever been told to dim your light to make someone else comfortable, this story is for you. Hit that like button if you're ready to see how embracing your authentic self can turn the tables completely. And don't forget to subscribe because we're just getting started. Let me tell you about the night meet Nia. I learned that sometimes the very thing someone asks you to hide is exactly what the world needs to see. My name is Nia, and 3 years ago I was living what everyone thought was a fairy tale. I was a successful pediatric surgeon saving children's lives every day and married to Jonathan Wright, one of the youngest billionaires in tech. From the outside, we had it all. The penthouse overlooking the city, designer everything, and invitations to events most people only see in magazines. But fairy tales, as I meet Jonathan learned, aren't always what they seem. I met Jonathan at a medical charity event where his company was donating millions to children's hospitals. I was presenting research on pediatric heart surgery when our eyes met across that crowded ballroom. He was charming, intelligent, and when he asked me to dance, I felt like I was floating. 6 months later, he proposed with a ring that cost more than most people's houses. The wedding was featured in 3 different magazines, and everyone said we were the perfect power couple. The problems started small. So small problems start small, almost miss them. Jonathan would suggest different hairstyles, saying certain looks were more professional for his business events. He'd buy me dresses and then casually mention how much the board members' wives loved European designers. At first, I thought he was just trying to help me navigate his world, which was so different from mine. Then I started noticing the photos. In the photos, his home office, tucked between awards and business magazines, were pictures of Madison, his ex-girlfriend. She was everything I wasn't. Blonde, pale, always wearing flowing dresses that looked like they belonged in a museum. When I asked about them, Jonathan would wave it off, saying they were just memories or part of his past, but I caught him looking at those photos sometimes. A distant expression on his face that made my stomach twist. The comments became more frequent. Madison always wore her hair straight to these events, he'd say, running his fingers through my natural curls. The investors really responded to her classic style. Each comment felt like a tiny paper cut, barely noticeable until suddenly you realize you're bleeding everywhere. I was a surgeon, tried to brush it off. I was a surgeon, for crying out loud. I saved lives. I had my own career, my own identity. But when you hear something enough times, especially from someone you love, it starts to burrow into your mind like a parasite. I found myself second-guessing everything. My clothes, my hair, even the way I laughed. Was I too loud, too different, too much? Everything came to a head 3 weeks before the annual Wright Foundation Gala, the biggest event of Jonathan's year. This wasn't just a party. It was where million-dollar deals were made, where investors decided whether to trust you with their money, where reputations were built or destroyed. Jonathan had been stressed about it for months, talking about how important it was for his company's expansion into African markets. That Tuesday evening, I came home from a 14-hour surgery to find Jonathan waiting in our bedroom with a manila folder in his hands. He was pacing, which he only did when he was nervous. And the serious look on his face made my heart skip. "Nia, we need to talk about the gala," he said, sitting on the edge of our king-sized bed. "This year is different. We're courting some very traditional investors. People who, well, they have certain expectations." I was exhausted, still in my scrubs, just wanting to shower and collapse. "What kind of expectations?" I asked, though something in his tone made me not want to hear the answer. That's when he opened the folder and pulled out a photo of Madison. She was at some charity event wearing a flowing champagne-colored gown. Her blonde hair swept into an elegant updo. She looked like she'd stepped out of a Renaissance painting. I stared at that photo dressed like this, he said, not meeting my eyes. The board loved her style. She had this timeless elegance that really resonated with the investors we're targeting. I stared at that photo, then at my husband, waiting for him to say he was joking. When he didn't, I felt something cold settle in my chest. "You want me to dress like your ex-girlfriend?" My voice sounded strange, even to me. "It's not about Madison," he said quickly. "It's about what works, what sells. Nia, this deal could be worth hundreds of millions. These investors are old school, conservative. They respond to a certain aesthetic." "You mean they respond to white women?" The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Jonathan ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I used to find endearing, but now just irritated me. "This isn't about race," he said finally. "It's about business, about image. You know how important this is to me, to us? Can't you just try for one night?" I looked at Madison's photo again, at her pale skin and flowing dress. At everything I could never be, even if I wanted to. Then I looked at my reflection in our bedroom mirror, my rich dark skin, my natural hair that Jonathan wanted me to straighten. My body that didn't match the European beauty standards he was asking me to conform to. "I need to think about it," I said, and I saw relief flash across his face. He thought I was going to say yes. The next 2 weeks were torture. I found myself standing in front of that mirror every morning, studying my face, my skin, my hair, like I was looking at a stranger. I found myself appointments at hair salons and cancelled them. I went shopping for dresses that would make me look like Madison and left empty-handed every time. The whole thing felt like I was being asked to erase myself, to become a ghost in my own life. The breaking point came when I was visiting my Aunt Kendra, the only family I had left in the city. She was a fashion designer who'd spent years creating beautiful clothes for women who looked like me. Women who wanted to celebrate their heritage instead of hide it. I'd been sitting in her studio for an hour, pretending to drink tea while she worked when she finally put down her sewing and looked at me directly. "Child, what's eating at you? You look like you've been carrying the weight of the world." And suddenly it all came pouring out. The photos, the comments, the gala, the dress code that felt more like a prison sentence. When I finished, Aunt Kendra was quiet for a long moment, her dark eyes thoughtful. "Let me ask you something," she said finally. "When you're in that operating room saving a child's life, do you think about whether your hands are too dark? Do you worry that your natural hair makes you less capable of holding that tiny heart?" "Of course not," I said. I'm just a surgeon. I'm just me." "Exactly. You're just you and you're magnificent." She stood up and walked to a fabric display that had been covered with a sheet. "I've been working on something special, and I think it's time you saw it." When she pulled away that sheet, I gasped. It was the most beautiful fabric I'd ever seen. Rich Kent cloth in gold, red, and black, but woven in a pattern that looked almost "this is who you are" modern, sophisticated. Next to it hung jewelry that looked like it belonged to an African queen. Gold and amber pieces that caught the light and seemed to glow. "This is who you are," Aunt Kendra said softly. "This is your heritage, your power, your beauty. Jonathan fell in love with you, not some blonde ghost from his past. If he can't see that, if his business partners can't see that, then maybe they don't deserve what you have to offer." I ran my fingers over that beautiful fabric and felt something shift inside me. For weeks, I'd been thinking about how to make myself smaller, how to fit into someone else's idea of acceptable. But looking at that Kent cloth, I remembered my grandmother's stories about African queens who ruled empires, who were respected and feared and loved for exactly who they were. "Can you make me a dress?" I asked, and Aunt Kendra smiled like she'd been waiting her whole life for me to ask that question. The week before the gala, I spent every free moment at Aunt Kendra's studio. We designed a dress that honored my heritage while still being elegant enough for Jonathan's business world. The Kent cloth was formed into a stunning gown with clean, modern lines. The traditional jewelry was paired with contemporary pieces that complemented rather than competed. My hair would be styled in an intricate updo that incorporated African braiding techniques but looked sophisticated and regal. When I tried on the complete outfit 3 days before the event, I barely recognized myself in the mirror. I looked powerful, beautiful, proud. I looked like me, but the best version of myself I'd ever seen. Jonathan, however, was horrified. "What is this?" he asked when I showed him the dress. "Nia, we talked about this. We agreed you'd wear something more appropriate." "We didn't agree on anything," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "You told me what you wanted. I'm telling you what I'm going to do. This is a business event, not a cultural festival. You're going to stand out for all the wrong reasons. Maybe standing out is exactly what your business needs." The fight that followed was unlike anything we'd ever had. Jonathan accused me of being selfish, of sabotaging his biggest deal. I accused him of being ashamed of me, of wanting a wife who looked like his ex instead of the woman he actually married. We said things that night that cut deep, words that would take months to heal from. The morning of the gala, we barely spoke. Jonathan left early for final preparations, and I spent the day at a spa with Aunt Kendra, getting ready for what felt like the most important evening of my life. As the stylist worked on my hair and makeup, I kept thinking about all the black women who'd come before me, who'd fought for the right to be seen and heard and respected the red carpet exactly as they were. When I looked in the mirror that evening, I saw my grandmother in my eyes, my mother in my smile, generations of strong women who'd refused to dim their light for anyone. The woman looking back at me was fierce, beautiful, and unapologetically black. Jonathan was waiting in the living room when I emerged, dressed in his perfectly tailored tuxedo. When he saw me, his face went through a series of expressions. Shock, worry, and then something I couldn't quite read. "You look," he started, then stopped. "Differ than Madison?" I asked. "You look like a queen," he said quietly. And for a moment, I saw a glimpse of the man who'd fallen in love with me 3 years ago. The ride to the hotel was tense. Jonathan kept adjusting his tie and checking his phone, and I could feel his anxiety radiating through the car. When we pulled up to the red carpet, photographers immediately started snapping pictures. I heard whispers as we walked toward the entrance, but I kept my head high and my shoulders back. Inside the ballroom, the reaction was immediate. Conversations stopped mid-sentence as we walked by. Some stares were admiring, others confused, a few openly hostile. Jonathan's jaw was tight as he guided me through the room, introducing me to investor after investor with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The evening was going about as badly as he'd predicted until the auction began. The Wright Foundation's biggest fundraiser was always for the auction children's education, and this year they were focusing on building schools in Ghana. As the auctioneer described the project, showing photos of children who needed educational opportunities, something stirred in my chest. These were kids who looked like I had at their age. Kids whose potential was being limited by circumstances beyond their control. When the bidding started slow, when I saw wealthy donors looking bored and checking their phones, I made a decision that surprised even me. I stood up. "Excuse me," I said, and my voice carried clearly through the ballroom. "Before we continue, I'd like to say something about this project." Jonathan's face went pale, but I was already walking toward the microphone. The room was dead silent as I took the stage. Hundreds of eyes focused on me and my African-inspired gown. "My name is Nia Wright and I'm a pediatric surgeon." I began, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "Every day I hold children's hearts in my hands. I see their potential, their brilliance, their dreams. And tonight I'm looking at photos of children in Ghana who have that same potential, that same brilliance, that same right to dream big." You could have heard a pin drop in that ballroom. The dress I'm wearing tonight isn't just beautiful fabric. It's Kente cloth, a textile that represents the rich history and culture of West Africa. My ancestors, the ancestors of those children, were trying to help, created art and literature and scientific innovations that changed the world. They built kingdoms and universities while Europe was still in the Dark Ages. When we invest in the applause children's education, we're not just building schools. We're unlocking the potential of the next generation of leaders, innovators, and world changers. We're honoring the legacy of a proud people and ensuring that brilliance isn't wasted because of where someone happened to be born. The applause started small but grew until the entire room was on their feet. I looked out at faces that had been indifferent minutes before and saw genuine emotion, real engagement. "So please," I continued, "don't just bid on this project. Invest in it. Believe in it. Help us show these children that their dreams matter, that their heritage is something to be proud of, and that the world is waiting to see what they can accomplish. When I stepped away from the microphone, the bidding was fierce. Investors who hadn't even been paying attention before were raising their paddles, competing to be part of something they now understood was bigger than just charity. The final amount raised was 3 times what Jonathan had hoped for. But the real surprise came after the auction when investor after investor approached our table. They weren't talking to Jonathan about his tech company. They were talking to me about my speech, about the project, about how my passion had inspired them to get involved. "Mrs. Wright," said Harrison Blake, one of the most powerful investors in the room, "your authenticity tonight was refreshing. In a world full of corporate speak and empty gestures, you reminded us why we started investing in meaningful projects in the first place." Another investor, Patricia Chen, nodded enthusiastically. "My firm has been looking for opportunities in African development. After hearing you speak, we'd love to discuss how we can support more projects like this one." As the evening continued, I watched Jonathan's expression change from anxiety to the investors' amazement to something that looked like pride. The investors weren't just responding to my speech. They were responding to the fact that I'd been genuine, that I'd spoken from the heart about something I truly cared about. By the end of the night, Jonathan had 3 new major investors interested in his African expansion, 2 partnership opportunities he hadn't even been seeking, and a reputation as a CEO whose company valued authenticity and cultural awareness. In the car ride home, we sat in silence for several minutes before Jonathan finally spoke. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "Actually, I owe you several apologies." I looked out the window at the city lights streaming by, feeling emotionally drained, but oddly peaceful. "I was scared," he continued. "I was so focused on what I thought they wanted to see that I forgot what made me fall in love with you in the first place. Your strength, your passion, your ability to see what really matters. Tonight, you didn't just save my business deal. You made it better than I ever imagined it could be." "I wasn't trying to save your deal," I said. "I was trying to save myself." Jonathan was quiet for a moment. "I almost lost you, didn't I? Not just tonight, but over these past few months, I was so busy trying to make you fit into my world that I forgot you were already perfect for it. It took time for us to fully heal from those months of tension and misunderstanding." Jonathan had to confront his own insecurities about acceptance in his predominantly white business world. And I had to forgive him for making me feel like I needed to change who I was to be second gala worthy of love. But 6 months later, at another charity gala, I wore another African-inspired gown. This time, Jonathan didn't just support my choice. He proudly told everyone who would listen about my heritage, about the projects we were funding in Africa, about how my perspective had expanded his understanding of global business. The investors from that first gala had become partners and friends. The African expansion was ahead of schedule and more successful than anyone had projected. And I learned something that night that changed everything. When you stop trying to be what others want you to be and start being authentically yourself, you don't just improve your own life. You give others permission to do the same. Nia's courage to stay true to herself didn't just save her marriage, it elevated it. Sometimes the very thing someone asks you to hide is exactly what the world needs to see. If this story inspired you to embrace your authentic self, smash that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Subscribe for more stories about finding your power and never dimming your light for anyone. Remember, your authenticity isn't just beautiful, it's your superpower.